Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast, The Cybersecurity Bridge. If you're not familiar with the Cybersecurity Bridge, you are in the way minority. But each episode is about a particular area of cybersecurity, and we break it into three sections. In the first section, we talk about the present of that area. In the second section, we talk about the future of that area. And then the third section is the Cybersecurity Bridge, where we go from the present to the future, and we talk about impediments, drivers, things like that. And I am just honored and happy as a clam to have my guest on, an old friend, Roy Chua. Roy, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you, John. Yeah, it's been a while since we've known each other, ever since you were a teenager. It's been 20 something years. And so I run a small analyst firm called AvidThink. We used to be part of a media company called STX Central, which I co-founded back in 2012. We spun out in 2018 and have been independent since. We cover what I call infrastructure technologies, notably mostly in the networking arena across enterprises, data centers, and the telcos. We do work with a lot of telcos. That is about half the business there. And it's an interesting space. It is a space that's challenged worldwide from a returns and financial perspective, and yet it is so critical to our infrastructure, and it's something that none of us can live without. So glad to be here, John.
Thank you, Roy. And we are going to talk about telecommunication cybersecurity. But before we do, are you ready to play cybersecurity trivia?
I don't know about that, but you can go ahead and ask the questions, and I'll pretend I don't know the answer.
Right, this is an oldie but goodie, and it may be a layup for you. So, and I'm going to read. I knew the answer to this, but I have to read the way I formed the question. So, early on in the technology arena, probably in the 90s or so, maybe in the 80s, phone phreakers discovered that AT&T used a tone of 2600 hertz to signal long-distance trunk lines, to signal a long-distance trunk line that it was ready for a new call. Phone phreakers figured out that you could trick the system to give them an open phone line by blowing a whistle, a toy whistle, into the phone receiver. Now, the question is, where did they get that toy whistle? It was in, hold on, Roy, don't jump the gun. Okay. It was in a breakfast cereal, and was it in Rice Krispies, Frosted Flakes, Count Chocula, Captain Crunch, or Total?
Yeah, it's Captain Crunch. It's the whistle, and that's where it came from. Exactly, Captain Crunch.
I knew it would be a layup for you.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the early things I had read, and that always fascinated me about how you could use essentially an analog phone line, and by playing tones over it, actually break systems. So that was one of the things that got me into cybersecurity, surprisingly.
Wow. So that's good. I mean, and when I talk to young people in cybersecurity, they don't know the history of that Captain Crunch, John Draper, who was Captain Crunch, the Kevin Mitnicks and the Kevin Polsons of the world. So worth researching that. But let's move on. So, Roy, 2025 is coming to an end, and there were some serious breaches of telecommunications companies, most notably AT&T.
Yeah,
I think T-Mobile had another breach, or maybe that was in 2024. Verizon had an insider attack, Orange. What the heck is going on, Roy?
Well, it's kind of like, why do criminals rob banks, right? That's where the money is, right? And so I think for a lot of the attackers, the communications infrastructure are great because that's where the information is, or that's where the information crosses. And so for them, it's a gold mine of access to information. It's not just one-time access. It's not like going into, maybe your financial institutions and pulling some information like your social security numbers, or going into, say, a medical care facility and pulling those things. If you get access to the telecommunications infrastructure and you can stay there for some time, so if you can actually stay there and watch, then you can tap into a lot of critical communications that pass over that, whether it's, you calling a mom and saying hi, or whether it's someone like a senator calling someone else and passing along critical information. So it's it's really wonderful for those who are trying to get information. But just as importantly, if I can sit in your telecommunications infrastructure and disable you and selectively disable you, I can take you down during a critical time. If I'm attacking you during a war or there's something else going on, as we saw in some conflicts in Europe, for instance, right? Having control of telecommunication infrastructure and being able to either extract information from it or take it down, denial of service, those are just equally important. And so for a lot of nation state actors, it's a prime target. It's part of critical infrastructure.
Yeah, as you say that, Roy, I'm reminded that the United States military hacked the Iraqi telecommunications infrastructure to find IEDs or the intelligence around IEDs.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about legacy debt. So telecommunications providers have multiple networks that they have to support. How does that affect security?
Yeah, the telecommunications infrastructure, I mean, until very recently, we still had the old sort of copper lines, the fixed wire lines that went into people's homes, right? Those are pretty much decommissioned. But if you look at telecommunications infrastructure, the fact that they're critical means that they have to usually support standards for a very long time because it's expensive to go up and replace everyone's analog phones, for instance. It takes time, it takes money. And so most communication carriers in the world are maintaining multiple generations of equipment, whether it's wireline equipment, your fixed phone line or fiber, or in some cases, the copper coax, or it's wireless. In many of the countries out there, still have 3G, in some cases 2G networks, along with 4G and 5G. And the challenge with that is, as we well know, we're very good at, taking the new in, but not so good at trying to figure out how to maintain the old. And there is little money, generally speaking, to trying to fix or patch something that says the 3G infrastructure is sunsetting in 6 months or sunsetting in a year. What's the incentive to patch that versus, say, the 5G network or the 5G software that's in the process of being rolled out, and there's still dollars being spent to acquire those 5G, sort of 5G equipment or 5G software. And so, generally speaking, I mean, it's not just telecommunications, but any industry that has a lot of equipment and software that they have to maintain, just because people need to communicate. In some cases, it's regulated that you have to maintain that. That is really, really hard because your attack surface just keeps compounding over time. And plus, some of the people who maintain those systems or build those systems might be gone or dead, and you still have to keep those things up. So it becomes a very difficult problem. It's not an easy problem to solve, unfortunately. That's just a reality for telecom carriers.
Yes, and moving on to 6G at some point in the late 2020s or early 2030s, we'll see that again.
Yep.
Sort of a related question, though, Roy, is we're seeing much more edge computing. So I would say edge computing certainly increases the attack surface, but are the carriers designing security into their edge computing? So is it more secure or more vulnerable than just the telecom infrastructure in general?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's two parts to it. I mean, the edge can mean many things to many people. In some cases, the edge means on-premises equipment or on-premises devices or compute sitting inside sort of customer premises, right? Inside, your offices, your factories, your warehouses, for instance. In some cases, if you look at the edge for telco, it would mean your RAN sites, right? Your cell sites. It could mean a little telco shed sitting out there, or it could mean an aggregation site where your core runs and all the signals come together before it gets on the internet or goes back over the backbone. In all cases, these are distributed locations, right? So you have multiple distributed locations with a lot of computing capabilities and communications capabilities, networking capabilities in all those places. So I think there's two elements of it. One is just because of the distributed nature of it, you have more physical surface to actually consider. So you have more points of lockdown from a physical security standpoint, and also a sort of a cybersecurity standpoint. I think that's one element. So that's just the nature of it. The second element of that is, I would say, the complexity that comes with it. So the edge is a problem, But at the same time, if you look at some of the newer approaches, right? So 5G infrastructure, for instance, the orchestration has gotten better. So on one hand, you have more distributed sites, but on the other hand, your software in terms of its consistency, software updates, software management, your management and control planes have gotten a lot more sophisticated since then. So it's sort of two elements of that, right? There's increasing complexity in locations, but at the same time, your control, your visibility, your telemetry, your observability has improved. And is it more secure? Is it less secure? I think it's unclear, right? The attack surface has increased, but the ability to watch across that surface has improved as well. So could be a wash in the end of the day, right? In terms of looking at it, I would like to think actually it's more secure if you did it the right way. And my evidence for that is if you look at the cloud companies, right? Pick your favorite cloud, whether it's AWS or Microsoft or Google or Oracle. The cloud companies have a lot of surface area to secure. I mean, if you just look at all the assets that they have, the number of data centers that they have, and some of those even have regional, like local zones or even, edge sites. They do a pretty good job. I mean, of course, we don't know about the breaches that we haven't found yet, but as far as we can tell, right, they do a really good job in securing that entire infrastructure because they build it from the ground up to be secure. For instance, Amazon or AWS itself has their Nitro architecture, which is highly secure, and so far as we know, not breached yet. So it proves that it is doable in the cloud type infrastructure. And for telcos, the newer infrastructure that they're rolling out is cloud-like, is cloud-based, is cloud-native, in process of, right? Now that's side by side with a lot of legacy stuff, right? So you have to take that with a grain of salt. But fundamentally, I think if done correctly, there is no reason why a more distributed architecture isn't more secure, if done correctly. And that's the big if. Right?
If done correctly.
Yeah.
That is a big if, Roy, and let's hope that it is done correctly. But let's move on to the future, Roy. And of course, you can't have any conversation in our domain without talking about AI. And the telcos are embracing this. They may be some of the pioneers in AI, which has positive and benefit attributes. So talk to me about that. What do you see in the future in terms of API use and API security?
Yeah. So with regard to the telcos, they are definitely embracing APIs. Many of them look at it as the future to unlock value from the networks. It's probably a little overhyped right now. I think the GSMA commissioned a study by McKinsey that said, we can unlock 300 billion worth of value with telco APIs. And I think that's super vague. And I don't think that's exactly accurate. But nevertheless, it's going to be a big unlock if done appropriately. So the telcos are looking at ways of monetizing the networks, monetizing services on those networks via programmatic interfaces with APIs, because the hope is that developers will build applications, which is what they've always hoped, on top of those networks to unlock value on those. So that's one element of it. The second one is usually AI. So you talk telcos as two words. They like API and AI, right? And one has a P and one doesn't. I think that's the main difference. It's as far as I can tell. But with regard to AI, they are embracing AI across the board. So we are seeing telcos run a lot of POCs, in some cases going into production with AI. And it ranges from customer service, customer interaction, so working with the customer, reducing the churn, improving the cross-sell, upsell, also dealing with customer support or chatbots and the like, augmenting the sales and marketing teams. So we're seeing AI used in terms of the customer-facing elements, all the way to the back office in terms of what they call the BSS, the building support systems, and the operational support systems, or OSS. They're putting AI in there to try to improve the efficiency of it, to try to improve sort of the revenue, preventing revenue leakage. So they apply AI to those elements, and then all the way as well using AI on the network operations side of things to try to keep the network up, improve the resiliency of the network, optimize the capacity of the network, plan ahead, do capacity management. So we're seeing AI across all aspects of telcos, and we are seeing early results, at least with the POCs. In many cases, the OpEx is reduced by 30 to 50%. We've heard from multiple telcos that they are in fact seeing that. So there is some advantage, but at the same time, they have to be equally careful, especially being telcos. They have high degree of SLAs. They always want their 5 nines, and so they're very cautious about applying AI, especially to any network operation. And so it starts with more advisory, co-pilot type stuff. I think eventually what we're seeing is that the evidence is that the AI eventually will be able to do self-remediations, sort of autonomous operations, early stages of that, but we're seeing promising results on that side. But meanwhile, using it for customer service, chatbots, as long as you train a chatbot correctly, is a plus, right? So far. So certainly they're looking at it and hoping that there's value in it. There is one element of AI that telcos are also looking at, which I am still mixed on, and not so relevant in cybersecurity, but some of the telcos believe that they can be sovereign providers of AI computing systems, AI computing services, because we're telcos, we have sovereign infrastructure, we have some data centers, and therefore maybe we could be providers of sovereign AI services, AI compute, GPU as a service. That one I'm mixed on. I'm not so sure yet that everyone should be jumping onto that as a telco, because a GPU as a service looks a lot like a cloud. And we know how that story went for a lot of the telcos, Verizon and Terramark, AT&T, getting rid of the data centers worldwide. The telcos, I think, proved not in general. I mean, there was specific success in there, but in general, that cloud services trying to compete with the hyperscalers weren't the best type of business that they should be in. And so I think just trying to sell AI as a service or GPU as a service, I think that's one element of AI that telcos should be very careful about. But the rest of using AI for its own businesses, absolutely. I think that's going to be a big win.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ryan. First, I think I confused API and AI security when I asked the question, but your last point is really good because historically, telcos have been very successful as hosting providers, telecom hotels, those kinds of things. Yeah. But when you try to, and you could say, well, GPU as a service is infrastructure. And it is, but the cloud providers will provide a lot of the application level hooks.
That's correct.
And services, and that's something the telcos haven't done as well with. Let me switch gears on you though, Ryan. Post-quantum cryptography is an area that telcos need to pay attention to, and maybe enterprises have a little bit longer of a time frame where they don't have to think about it as much. What are you hearing there?
I'm hearing that a lot of the telcos are adopting that, particularly in Europe, and most of the telcos there are investing in sort of two areas with regard to quantum. One is PQC, post-quantum cryptography, enabling PQC capabilities on their links, so that you have secure communications that I would say hopefully defeats the sort of the harvest now, decrypt later attacks, right? Basically, let me collect the information, and when I get quantum computers, I can decrypt it and hopefully find something, the nugget of information that's useful to me. So they are fully aware of that. Generally speaking, a lot of European telcos are and offering PQC on their networks. The second element of quantum, as it comes to carriers, and again, we're seeing success in Europe and also in Asia, quantum key distribution, so QKD, distribution of keys in a secure manner in a way that is that prevents anyone from peeking at it without your knowledge. So using the fiber networks that they have to do quantum key distribution, so you can use a box cipher sort of end-to-end, and you have a one-time pad that you send over a QKD, so you know your key is secure. So they're also starting to provide those services in Europe. And I'm not quite sure why the Europeans are so much into it. And we're seeing less interest in the US with regard to both PQC. We talk about it less, or they talk about it less. Likewise, they don't talk as much about QKD either. So I'm not sure what the case is there, but I do see PQC, thankfully, at a higher level on the enterprise side. So the enterprises are pushing their security vendors. And so if you look at all the major network security vendors, whether it's Palo Alto, whether it's Cisco, pick your favorite on a Fortinet, PQC is being added into all the firewalls, VPN devices, end-to-end encryption. So thankfully, at least enterprises are aware of that, and they are concerned about that, apparently. But from a carrier telco standpoint, the Europeans seem to be ahead on those fronts.
Okay. No, good points there. My last guest on my podcast was an old friend of ours, I think, John Kindervag.
Yep.
And of course, the godfather of Zero Trust. We talked about Zero Trust. Zero Trust comes up with telecommunication security, especially as they talk about, well, what they're doing as a result of the breaches.
Yeah.
So where do you see zero trust today, and where is it going in the future in terms of the telecommunications infrastructure?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that zero trust comes up only sort of after the attacks, right? I mean, sometimes they talk about it, but after Salt Typhoon and after the SKT hacks in Korea, now everyone's like, well, how do we fix this? Well, zero trust, like that's the universal answer. So, but we've known about zero trust, John, for a long, long time. We've talked about it in 2005 when we first met. So 20 years ago, it was zero trust before zero trust, right? It's basically, there is no outside, there is no inside, right? You basically have to secure every element based on context. Now, fast forward 20 years later, now people are realizing that that's actually important. And from a carrier perspective, so they are talking about it, they are trying to enforce it. But as we know, it's not trivial to enforce, right? And it should be the way. If you think about telecommunications, it's critical communications, critical infrastructure. Before you get access to any element in the network, especially those that are passing traffic, right? You should be careful about who you're letting on, right? There shouldn't be like, oh, there's a firewall, and if you're sitting inside that little room or data center, you're safe. You're not, because I don't know who you are. I don't know how you got in there. So the telcos are aware of it. However, I think that they don't understand the complexity of how to implement it. They don't understand the importance of having a set of policies that can be audited, that's visible. I don't think they fully understand the importance of identity in this whole infrastructure, identity of the users, the humans, identity of devices. And now with AI and the rise of agents, or the use of agents and AI, the identity of those agents as well, and the privileges associated with that. So I do hope, and I do see that, I do hope that the telcos move in that direction. And I know that the ones in Europe, NIS2 and some of the standards in there are starting to move in those directions because there is regulation involved. In Asia, I think just because of pure embarrassment and the fact, I think SKT and some of those breaches, I think they are moving towards those as well. The US, I think, with Salt Typhoon, I think some of them have strengthened their cybersecurity defenses. We'll see how well that works, on a voluntary basis, because, I know, and hopefully some of the regulators in the US push that as the Europeans have, because this is critical infrastructure, and we should be careful with our critical infrastructure and hold them to a higher standard, because at the end of the day, communications is the lifeblood of most modern economies. I mean, those based on digital economies should really be secure. We should have high standards, including zero trust. And we know how to do this. I mean, NIST has a good set of standards around that, right? So we should implement.
Yeah, and that I appreciate that, Roy, because let's move on to the cybersecurity bridge, how we get from the present to the future. And I was going to ask specifically, so the Europeans have NIS2.
Yep.
They've got DORA. So they're much more regulatory forward than the United States. Is the FCC doing anything here? Do you anticipate anything, or will this only come after some killer breach?
So the FCC actually, I think we've declined to enforce recently. We actually stepped back a little bit, and we're going for voluntary compliance, hopefully. But I think given we work with a lot of telcos, and they have a lot on their plate, right? They have a lot of things to do in their business. And so, I mean, the hope is that they will secure. I know that some of the telcos that we work with have come out and say, look, we've strengthened our defenses, right? T-Mobile put out a press release that said, look, we were actually not hacked by Salt Typhoon. We were able to resist some of that attack, unlike some of the, our competitors. So perhaps, that's a good sign. And maybe from a competitive nature, that will actually work out. But I think it's still important, for the government to enforce some level of security, given that there's a lot of private information in those networks. Not just us, I mean, state and local government, even federal government, a lot of that runs over communications networks. And to the extent that we can raise the bar, I mean, we should be setting the standards for the rest of the world. I mean, we have NIST. A lot of the world is looking at NIST standards. I mean, they're actually copying them and just modifying them for their own standards. So given that that's the case, and we have the technology, we have the standards, we should be leading the world in cybersecurity. And given the strength of the telecommunication providers here in the US, right, which are financially a lot stronger and technologically, actually in many ways stronger than many of the carriers in the rest of the world, we should be leading the charge around security of critical infrastructure, critical communications, leading the world in terms of security in standards like zero trust and enforcing that everywhere. So that's my hope. I mean, that's part of the bridge, right? We need a way to get there, and hopefully the carriers will see upon themselves to actually do that. But failing which, then the regulators will probably want to step in and have to step in.
Another thing that I'm intrigued with, and I ask this question a lot in my podcast, is about skill sets. So you need legacy networking skills, you need cloud security skills, API security skills, now AI security skills. Is this something that you feel like the telcos have a good handle on, or are they struggling to find the right people and train the right people like most organizations?
Yeah, so I would say most enterprises are lacking cybersecurity skills. Telcos also, right? AI ML skills, and then the combination of AI ML and security skills add onto that telco skills. That's one that I think what they call a purple squirrel in HR, right? It's actually purple squirrels do exist. I found out, but regardless, they're rare. So you do need people with those skills, and I think it's hard to find them in the first place. And more importantly, actually for telcos, it's harder to recruit. So one of the things that we found in working with telcos, over the last decade is it's hard for telcos to recruit because most people don't view telcos as a cool company to work for, right? And people with unique skills, especially AI and ML or AI, ML and security, right, would rather go work for a hot cybersecurity AI company, of which there are multiple. And when they look at, 30 plus billion acquisition of Wiz by Google, they're like, hey, I want to work for the next Wiz or the next whatever, you pick your favorite, right? And so would you like to go work for a telco? And they're like, what? Why? And so there is a challenge for the telcos to recruit and retain people who know networking, who know AI, ML, and who know security. That's very hard to find. So I think the telcos probably would be better off. Of course, they should continue to try to recruit and maybe improve their brand image. Maybe some of them can, maybe some of them can't. But partnering, finding partners who can recruit that kind of talent, depending on outside consultants who have that capability to bring them in and work with the telco, right? So some of the global integrators, the GSIs, right, the Accentures of the world, and do have the talent and are able to recruit the talent. And so, whether it's Accenture or a specific consulting company, there's no reason why they can't work with those people to bring that skill in or borrow that skill within a telco. And I think that's important.
Okay. Talk to me about the Open Radio Access Network, or Open RAN. Is that a security? Is that going to help us get more secure, or is that really just a supply chain diversification thing?
So ORAN was meant to be both a supply chain diversification, ecosystem expansion, and innovation game. That was what Open RAN was supposed to be. And it has succeeded in some ways. So I won't go into the details of that, but there has been some success in Open RAN. And the architecture itself, the disaggregated architecture, that modern cloud API type architecture, I think has succeeded and will continue to succeed regardless of how the ecosystem turns out. So the advantage of that ORAN architecture is that interfaces, like most telco interfaces, are going to be relatively well defined, and there is a wide ecosystem of people that are looking at it. So in the early days of ORAN, actually, there was a major incumbent who argued, and you can look at it, it was actually Ericsson back then, right now, because it's pretty public information, who raised concerns that an open architecture like that would be less secure because it was not proprietary. Now, we've heard that before, John. I mean, it's open versus closed. Closed is better. It's proprietary. No one knows about it, and therefore it's more secure, right? So that argument played out again. Now, I think since that point, I think Ericsson has moderated its stance. It's actually supporting Open RAN now. So I think the reality is the O-RAN architecture is no more or no less secure than the previous proprietary RAN architecture. You could argue again that, because it's more open, more people, more eyes on it, that potentially it's more secure. But given, that was the argument around open source being more secure, and we're seeing a lot of open source bit breaches, because the fact that the software is open doesn't mean that you have a lot of eyes watching it, or the expert pair of eyes watching it, right? And so I think, it's sort of a wash, but it is a more open architecture, and I still hope that it will drive larger ecosystem expansion, just because of the openness of the architecture, and more importantly, more innovation in the long run. So I still believe that it can still serve those purposes, but from a cybersecurity standpoint, I don't think it's better or it's worse. My hope, part of the issue is, my hope was that there would be more security startups looking at some of these open architectures, right? 5G architecture, the service-based architecture, and O-RAN, those are relatively open architectures, and they're cloud-like, which, and my hope was that there'll be more startups or other companies bringing the expertise in the telco regime to try to improve the security of that, right? So O-RAN security scanning or whatever it is, we haven't quite seen that. I think the market hasn't quite developed for that. I think, again, because telcos are still looked upon as not the coolest thing and the biggest markets, and historically the VCs, the moment you say you're trying to sell to a telco, the money stops, right? I've had friends who started companies and say, "Yo, we're going to go for the telco market," and immediately, they're like, "Well, sorry, I don't have time to talk to you. I'm really busy," right? Which is unfortunate. So, but these things come in cycles. I mean, semiconductors were not cool just a couple of years ago. They're like, "Oh, semiconductor. Well, that's a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 year, life cycle, in terms of getting products out, and that's too long." Well, now there's a lot of semi investment, and so maybe those communications become cool again. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And Lord knows, about the VCs pulling the rug out from companies. I know that's a different story.
That is a long story.
Real quickly, because we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
I look at 6G, and the design and the function of 6G scares the heck out of me from a cybersecurity perspective. So quickly, is there a killer app for 6G? And what do you think about 6G and the attack surface that it will promote?
I don't see yet a killer app for 6G. Some of them are saying it's AI. It's not clear to me how AI is a killer app for 6G. I think AI is an enabler for 6G, but it's not clear to me that 6G changes the way we communicate and talk to and use AI. So, in fact, a lot of the telcos are not ready to talk too much about 6G. They don't want to hear about 6G in general, with very few exceptions, because they're still busy trying to figure out how to monetize the 5G investments that they've.
True.
And so, in what I just had a conversation with probably arguably one of the largest vendors in the space for telcos, and the positioning now for 6G is interesting. They're now saying that, 6G is not about new radios or waveforms or sort of cool stuff on the signal side. 6G really is an optimization of the 5G infrastructure. 6G is about AI-based optimization, AI-based management, autonomous management of the networks, how we improve the capacity with better AI predictive ML learning, how we reduce OpEx, how we improve services and be service-centric. They're not talking about ripping and replacing a whole bunch of new radios. And this is probably one of the largest telco manufacturers in the world, but the US can't use. But if that's a positioning and they are on the cutting edge and bleeding edge, then I have to believe that their customers are telling them, "Hey, don't make us do a rip and replace. We're not ready. We're barely in the throes of monetizing that major investments we just made and are still making." So I think 6G will be a little different, but at the same time, it's not clear to me that cybersecurity is number one in 6G. It's clear to me that AI is number one in 6G, but it's not cybersecurity. Which again, right? We always miss the mark. Security continues to be an afterthought, and it can't be that. And that we've learned that, or we should have learned that by now, and somehow we still keep doing it. Yeah.
Okay, right. So we're at the conclusion of our talk. just a couple of things. And by the way, that sounds like a dot release. It doesn't sound like 6G to me. But two quick things. So, and real quick, do you have a prediction for 2026?
2026 will be yet another year of agentic AI, just like 2027 and 2028. But yes, that's a prediction.
Okay. I think agentic AI will be used for some type of telecommunications attack. I think it's, I mean, we compromise identities. We'll compromise an identity and have an agentic or an AI agent executing the attack, and that could be devastating. Final question, Roy, and I ask this of every guest. If there's one piece of advice you'd give to our audience, what would it be?
I would say use a password manager and use a hardware token if you can. That's what advice I give people. That's probably good protection. Simple advice, but it actually works remarkably well.
And anything for the telco sector itself?
Please put security first. Please, please.
Please, I echo that, Roy.
Yeah.
Well, Roy, as always, it was wonderful talking to you. I appreciate you being a guest on my podcast. Thank you.
You're very welcome, John. Always a pleasure. And it's a privilege and an honor to be speaking with you and to be on your podcast.
You're a flatterer, Roy.
Yeah.
And to the audience, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again, I guess, in 2026.